The night descends quietly. You are somewhere still. Perhaps you are lying down, your body beginning to release the weight of the day, muscle by muscle, thought by thought. There is nothing you need to do right now. Nowhere you need to be. Only this. Only the quiet. Only the story that is about to begin. Tonight, we travel to Japan. And we travel, in particular, to the world of sushi, one of the most recognized foods on the planet, and yet one of the least understood. Most people think they know what sushi is. A piece of raw fish placed over a small mound of rice. A delicate thing. Something clean and precise, arranged beautifully on a lacquered plate. And yes, in one sense, that is sushi. But in another, deeper sense, sushi is something far older, far stranger, and far more interesting than what you might find in a restaurant today. The story of sushi is the story of time itself, of patience, of the slow transformation of simple ingredients into something greater than the sum of their parts. It is a story that begins not in the gleaming sushi bars of Tokyo, but in the rice paddies and riverbeds of ancient Asia, thousands of years ago, when people were trying to solve a very simple problem. How do you keep fish from spoiling? Let us begin there. Let us go back to the very beginning. It is believed that the earliest form of what we now call sushi originated not in Japan, but somewhere in mainland Southeast Asia, possibly along the great river valleys of what is now Thailand, Myanmar, or Laos. The people who lived near these rivers were fishermen and rice farmers. Fish was plentiful, rice was plentiful, and the summers were long and hot. Preserving food was not a luxury. It was a matter of survival. The technique they discovered was remarkable in its simplicity. Cleaned fish were layered with salt and cooked rice, then packed tightly into wooden barrels or clay pots and left to ferment. The rice, as it fermented, produced lactic acid. That acid preserved the fish. Over weeks and then months, the fish slowly transformed, deepening in flavor, losing its raw quality, becoming something dense and pungent and deeply savory. When the fish was ready to eat, the rice was usually discarded. It had done its job. Only the fish was consumed. This technique traveled north, carried along trade routes, and in time, it reached the Japanese archipelago. Scholars believe it arrived in Japan sometime during the Yayoi period, roughly between 300 BCE and 300 CE, a time when rice cultivation was spreading across the islands and reshaping Japanese culture and society. The people of Japan adapted the technique to their own rivers and lakes, using freshwater fish, such as crucian carp, known in Japanese as funa. And so was born what we now call narezushi. It is, in many ways, the ancestor of all sushi. The word nare, in Old Japanese, carries the sense of something that has matured, something that has aged and ripened and been transformed by time. Narezushi is not a quick food. It is not a convenient food. It is a food that requires extraordinary patience. The fish and rice were packed together and left to ferment, not for days, but for months, sometimes for a full year, sometimes for 2 or 3 years. The longer the fermentation, the more intense and complex the flavor became. There is a version of narezushi that has survived to the present day. It is called funazushi, and it is made in the region around Lake Biwa, in Shiga Prefecture, the largest lake in Japan. Funazushi is made using the female crucian carp of that lake, stuffed with their own rice and salt packed, and then left to ferment for a minimum of 1 year. Some batches are aged for 3 years, or even 5. The flavor is deeply pungent, intensely sour, rich with the concentrated essence of fish and thyme. It is an acquired taste, to say the least. Many people today find it challenging, but those who love it speak of it with a reverence that is almost religious. It is a direct connection, unbroken, to the sushi of 1,000 years ago. For many centuries in Japan, narezushi was the only form of sushi that existed. It was not a street food, not a casual meal. It was a preserved food, made in autumn, eaten in spring or summer, a way of extending the harvest of the river through the long winter months. It was also a food of the nobility and the temples. Historical records from the Heian period, roughly the 9th through 12th centuries, a time of extraordinary cultural refinement in Kyoto, show that narezushi was given as tribute to the imperial court. It appeared in official government tax records. It was valuable enough to be used as a form of payment. And here is something worth dwelling on for a moment. In those early centuries, the idea that you might eat the rice along with the fish would have struck people as strange, even wasteful. The rice was the vehicle of preservation, not the food itself. It was a tool. The notion that the rice and the fish together might form a single unified dish, that they might be meant to be eaten together, had not yet arrived. That arrival, when it came, would change everything. The first shift came gradually, probably sometime during the Muromachi period, between the 14th and 16th centuries. Fermentation times began to shorten. People started eating the fish while the rice still retained more of its texture and flavor. This intermediate form is sometimes called nakanare, half matured, and it sits between the deeply fermented narezushi of antiquity and the something newer yet to come. With shorter fermentation times, the rice became more palatable, more integrated into the eating experience. People began to taste both the fish and the rice together. A new idea was beginning to take shape. But the truly transformative leap, the one that brought sushi closest to what we recognize today, came in the form of a brilliant shortcut. Rather than waiting months or years for fermentation to work its magic on the fish, someone realized that you could approximate the tangy, slightly sour flavor of fermented rice simply by adding vinegar to freshly cooked rice. Rice vinegar, added carefully and seasoned with salt and sometimes sugar, gave the rice a brightness that echoed the flavor of fermentation without any of the waiting. This style became known as hayazushi, fast sushi, and with it, the entire relationship between fish and rice was reimagined. Hayazushi still involved pressing fish and rice together in molds, layering them carefully, and leaving them under weights for a period of hours or days, but not months. The fish was still preserved or cured. The flavors still deepened and mingled through time and pressure. But now the rice was fully part of the dish, intended to be eaten together with the fish, its vinegared flavor complementing and brightening the richness of the seafood. This is the world of oshizushi, pressed sushi, which is still made and beloved today, particularly in the Kansai region of Japan, in cities like Osaka and Kyoto. Osaka, in particular, became famous for a style called hakuzushi, or bokusushi, in which layers of rice and fish, often mackerel, sea bream, or shrimp, were pressed together in a small wooden mold and then cut into neat rectangular pieces. If you visit Osaka today, you can still find this style of sushi in old established shops, made with the same careful attention to layering, pressing, and presentation that craftspeople have practiced for generations. There is a stillness to it, a compression of time and care into each small, perfect piece. And then we arrive in Edo, and everything changes again. Edo is the old name for Tokyo. By the early 18th century, Edo had grown into one of the largest cities in the world, with a population that some estimates place at over 1 million people, roughly comparable in size to London at the same period. It was a city of merchants, artisans, fishermen, government officials, actors, writers, and an enormous labouring class who built and maintained and fed the vast machinery of the city. It was loud, crowded, full of life, full of hunger. The bay that curved around Edo was extraordinarily rich. Tokyo Bay, as we now know it, was one of the most productive fishing grounds in Japan. Tuna, sea bass, flounder, shrimp, clams, octopus, conger eel, the waters gave abundantly. The Sumida River, flowing through the heart of the city, added its own harvest. Fish was everywhere in Edo. It was not a luxury food reserved for the aristocracy. It was the daily protein of the common people, sold from boats and carts, from open stalls along the riverbanks, from the dozens of fish markets that thrived throughout the city. Street food in Edo was sophisticated and varied. The city had a rich culture of eating outdoors, from portable stalls called yatae, small covered carts that could be set up along busy roads or near the entrances of theatres and bathhouses. Yatae sold soba noodles, tempura, dengaku, skewered tofu or vegetables lacquered with sweet miso, and grilled foods of many kinds. Edo was a city that ate on its feet, quickly, inexpensively, with pleasure. It is against this backdrop that a new form of sushi emerged. It is believed to have been developed sometime in the early 19th century, with historical accounts often pointing to the 1820s, and it is associated with a man named Hanaya Yohei, who operated a stall near the Ryogokubashi Bridge in Edo. Whether Yohei truly invented nigiri sushi on his own, or whether he refined and popularized a style that was already evolving in various forms, is a matter of historical debate. But his name is deeply woven into the origin story, and his stall is remembered as one of the places where something genuinely new was born. What he created, or crystallized, was the form we now call nigirizushi, hand-pressed sushi, a small oblong mound of vinegared rice, shaped gently but firmly between the palms, and topped with a single piece of fresh fish or seafood. That is all. And yet, the simplicity is deceptive. Within that simplicity is an entire philosophy. Here is one of those lesser-known facts that often surprises people who assume sushi has always been about raw fish. In the early days of Edo-style nigiri, the fish was almost never served raw, in the way we understand raw fish today. The seafood available at the Edo stalls was typically cured, marinated, braised, or prepared in some other way. Tuna was often soaked in soy sauce to preserve it and deepen its flavor, a preparation called zuke, because fatty tuna, left unattended, spoiled quickly in the summer heat. Shrimp were boiled, clams were simmered, conger eel was braised in a sweet soy glaze. What we now think of as the definitive quality of sushi, the rawness, was actually a later development, made possible only when refrigeration arrived, and could guarantee the safety and quality of truly fresh, unpreserved fish. The nigirizushi of Edo was also larger than what you typically find today. Historical accounts describe pieces that were quite substantial, something you would hold in both hands, or perhaps eat in 2 bites. Over time, as tastes refined and presentation became more central to the experience, the size decreased. Today's nigiri is typically intended to be eaten in a single, elegant bite, if possible. The transformation in size reflects a transformation in the entire philosophy of sushi eating. from a hearty, quick street food to a precise, contemplative dining experience. The Edo stalls operated at a remarkable pace. Orders were placed verbally. The chef shaped the rice with practiced speed. The topping was placed with precision, and the finished piece was passed across the counter almost immediately. This was fast food, but it was fast food made with real skill, the speed itself a product of deep expertise. A good stall chef could shape dozens of pieces in a few minutes, each one consistent in size and density, the rice just cohesive enough to hold together, just loose enough to melt apart on the tongue. And this brings us to the figure of the itamae, the sushi chef, and to the extraordinary world of training and apprenticeship that surrounds this profession. The word itamae, written in Japanese, refers to someone who stands before the cutting board. It is a simple, practical description. And yet the person it describes has often spent years, sometimes a decade or more, acquiring the skills to stand in that position with real mastery. In the traditional apprenticeship system of Japanese sushi, a young person entering the profession did not begin by making sushi. That would come much later, and only after a long process of preparation and learning that was as much about character and dedication as it was about technique. In the first months or even years of an apprenticeship at a high-level sushi restaurant, a new apprentice might spend their time washing rice, cleaning the kitchen, learning to observe the chef without being told anything directly. This is not accidental neglect. It is intentional. The apprentice is learning patience. They are learning that mastery cannot be rushed, that it accrues slowly, that watching and absorbing and waiting is itself a form of training. The art of cooking rice alone, something that sounds straightforward, almost trivially simple, was considered a task that took years to master. The ratio of water to rice, the resting time after washing, the precise heat required, the timing of the lid, the moment to remove the pot from the fire. All of these variables interact in ways that are subtle and significant, and the difference between ordinary rice and perfect sushi rice is palpable to anyone who has experienced both. The seasoning of the rice with vinegar, salt, and sugar, the proportion of which are a closely guarded element of every restaurant's identity, is another layer of complexity. A skilled sushi chef's rice has a particular temperature, a particular texture, a particular balance of acidity and sweetness that is as distinctive and personal as a signature. Then there is the fish. Learning to select fish, to look at a market full of options and identify what is at its absolute peak of quality, what has arrived from the sea at the precise right moment, what will still be magnificent after a few more hours of preparation, is an art in itself. The eye of an experienced itamae sees things that a novice cannot see. The color of the flesh, the clarity of the eye of a whole fish, the way the skin holds its sheen, the smell, clean and oceanic, without any heaviness or sourness. These judgments are made quickly, intuitively, accumulated from years of touching and smelling and tasting and remembering. And then the knife. The Japanese knife tradition is extraordinary in its own right, and the knives used by a sushi chef are specialized instruments that may take years to truly master. The yanagiba, a long single bevel blade designed specifically for slicing raw fish, requires a particular technique, a long drawing cut rather than a pressing or sawing motion that produces clean, smooth slices that do not tear the delicate flesh. The angle of the blade, the pressure applied, the movement of the wrist, All of this determines the quality of the slice, and by extension, the texture and mouthfeel of the finished piece of sushi. A fish sliced badly will taste different from the same fish sliced well, because the structure of the muscle fibers has been disrupted in one case and preserved in the other. It is sometimes said that a student of sushi must train for 2 years just to learn to make the rice correctly, and another 3 years before being trusted to handle the fish. Whether these numbers are taken literally or understood as expressions of the depth of commitment required, they communicate something true about the philosophy underlying this cuisine. There is no shortcut to mastery. The craft demands everything, and it gives back accordingly. There is a phrase sometimes used in discussions of Japanese craftsmanship, shokunin kishitsu. It refers to the spirit of the artisan, a deep, almost total identification with one's craft, a willingness to pursue perfection for its own sake, regardless of recognition or reward. The sushi chef who stands behind the counter at a traditional restaurant embodies this spirit. Their work is not primarily about creativity in the sense of invention or novelty. It is about consistency, precision, and the expression of quality through repetition, performed at the highest possible level. Each piece of sushi is an opportunity to do something exactly right, and that standard never relaxes. Let us also think for a moment about the space of the sushi counter itself. In traditional high-end sushi restaurants, the omakase restaurants where the chef decides what you eat, the counter is the entire theater of the experience. You sit close, perhaps 8 or 10 seats, facing the chef. There is no menu. You place yourself in the chef's hands entirely. The pieces are made one at a time and placed before you as they are completed, often directly on the polished wood of the counter rather than on a plate. The chef may say a word or two about what you are eating, the origin of the fish, the preparation, a brief note about the season, but the conversation is spare. The silence is not awkward. It is part of the meal. This is a very different relationship between eater and cook than what exists in most culinary traditions. There is an intimacy to it, a trust, and a kind of mutual respect that elevates the experience of eating into something closer to a shared ritual. The chef has chosen what is best today. You have come to receive that. The transaction is not commercial in its feeling, even though it is, of course, commercial in its reality. It feels more like being a guest in someone's home, being fed with care and attention. The seasonality of sushi is another dimension of this philosophy that deserves attention. In the traditional sushi world, the menu changes not month to month, but week to week, and sometimes almost daily, depending on what the fish market offers. A traditional itamae does not decide in advance what they will serve. They go to the market before dawn. They look at what is best that morning, and they build the day's offerings around those observations. This means that sushi, at its highest expression, is one of the most seasonal foods in the world. Not in the way that a vegetable garden is seasonal, but in a more fluid and responsive way, attuned to the movements of fish through ocean currents, the effects of weather on the fishing harvest, the gradual ripening and fading of each species through the calendar year. There is a concept in Japanese culinary culture called shun, the moment of peak ripeness, or optimal season for a given ingredient. Every fish, every shellfish, every type of seaweed has its shun. Cherry blossoms have their shun. So does the first young tuna of summer, the fat clams of winter, the silvery skin of a mackerel at the height of autumn. Paying attention to shun is a form of gratitude for what the natural world provides, a recognition that quality is not manufactured but received, that the best flavor comes when you are listening to what the season is offering, rather than insisting on your own preferences, regardless of time and circumstance. There is something deeply restful in this idea, that there is a right time for each thing, that the best quality comes not from forcing, but from aligning, that patience and attentiveness are in themselves ingredients. Before we follow sushi as it leaves Japan's shores, let us linger a little longer in the world of Edo, because the culture that surrounded sushi in that city was rich and layered in ways that shaped the food deeply, and understanding that world helps us understand why sushi became what it became. Edo was governed by the Tokugawa shogunate, a military government that had unified Japan after centuries of civil war and imposed a long-enforced peace. For over 2.5 centuries, from 1603 to 1868, Japan under the Tokugawa was largely closed to foreign trade and foreign influence. This isolation, sometimes called sakoku, created a particular kind of cultural pressure cooker. With nowhere to expand outward, Japanese culture turned inward, refining and deepening what it already had. Art, theater, literature, cuisine, craft, all flourished with extraordinary intensity during this period. The Edo period is sometimes called Japan's Great Age of Popular Culture. Within this culture of refinement, food was taken very seriously, not only at the imperial court or in the palaces of the powerful, but among ordinary townspeople, the merchants and craftsmen and entertainers who made up the thriving urban population of Edo. There was a word used in Edo that captures a particular ideal of urban sophistication: iki. It referred to a quality of effortless elegance, of knowing refinement worn lightly, without pretension or display. To be iki was to appreciate fine things without making a show of that appreciation, to eat well without fussing, to choose the best without explaining why. Sushi, in its Edo form, embodied iki. It was not a grand or elaborate food. It did not require a formal setting or expensive tableware. It was eaten at a stall, standing up perhaps, or on a bench nearby, with the hands or with a simple pick, quickly and with pleasure. But the quality of the fish, the precision of the rice, the balance of flavors, these were taken very seriously by the people who made it and the people who ate it. Excellence was pursued within simplicity. That is iki. The fish market of Nihonbashi, the central bridge district of Edo, was the beating heart of the city's seafood trade. Every morning before dawn, fishing boats arrived from the bay and from the rivers, and the market exploded into life. Hundreds of vendors and buyers moved through the stalls in the pre-dawn darkness, negotiating prices, selecting fish, shouting above the noise. By the time the sun was fully up, much of the morning's catch had already been distributed across the city, traveling by hand and by cart to the restaurants, stalls, and private kitchens of Edo's enormous population. The tuna trade is particularly fascinating. Bluefin tuna, maguro, were caught in large numbers in the waters around Japan, and a single large specimen could weigh several 100 kilograms. The fish was divided and sold, but the problem of preservation was constant and pressing. Before refrigeration, fresh tuna had to be consumed very quickly, and in the heat of a Tokyo summer, quickly meant within a few hours. The technique of marinating tuna slices in soy sauce, the Zouk method mentioned earlier, was a practical solution. The soy sauce slowed deterioration and added flavor. What began as a preservation technique became, over time, a preparation that people genuinely preferred for its taste. Some food historians have noted that this is a recurring pattern in culinary history. What begins as practical necessity, a way of dealing with the realities of spoilage, of limited ingredients, of difficult climates, ends up becoming aesthetically valued in its own right. The flavor produced by preservation is often interesting, complex, and rich in ways that fresh, unpreserved food is not. Fermentation, curing, smoking, pickling. These are all originally preservation techniques that became celebrated flavor-producing processes. Sushi is, in some sense, the entire story of that transformation compressed into a single dish. The relationship between sushi and the seasons of Edo was also deeply specific. Winter was considered the best time for sushi, partly because the cold air helped preserve the fish, and partly because certain fish, clams, some shellfish, certain flatfishes, are at their best in the cold months when their flesh is dense and sweet. Summer brought its own offerings from the warmer waters: sea bass, certain small fish, eel. The eel, in particular, has a special place in Edo food culture. Unagi, freshwater eel, has been eaten in Japan for thousands of years, and the tradition of eating it on a particular summer day. Doyo no ushi no hai, the day of the ox in the hottest part of summer, supposedly to ward off the heat and restore energy, is one of the most enduring seasonal food traditions in Japan. In Edo, the preparation of eel became a high art. The eel was split, deboned, skewered, and grilled over charcoal in a method called kabayaki. The eel is steamed between grillings, which gives it a particular texture, crisp and slightly caramelized on the outside, impossibly soft within. It is then glazed with a sweet, rich sauce of soy, mirin, and sugar, deepened by the years of accumulated drippings from previous batches of eel that fall into the sauce and cook in. Old eel restaurants in Tokyo are proud of their tear, the continuing sauce that may have been maintained and refreshed for 100 years or more, each batch of eel basted in a sauce that contains, in some molecular sense, the ghost of every eel that came before. Eel was not always served as sushi in the traditional sense, but it found its way onto the sushi counter too, typically as a slice of kabayaki-style eel, placed over a small ball of rice, a piece called anago in its sea eel form, which is a different but related species. Anago is the sea eel, lighter than freshwater eel, with a more delicate flavor, and it is braised rather than grilled in the classic preparation. At good sushi restaurants, anago is served warm, brushed with a sweet sauce, and it has a softness and sweetness that provides a perfect counterpoint to the brighter, more acidic qualities of the rice and the richer fish. The vegetarian and egg preparations in traditional sushi also deserve attention. Not all sushi is about fish. Tamago, the sweetened, carefully layered egg omelette that is served as a nigiri, is one of the benchmarks by which sushi chefs are sometimes evaluated. A beautiful piece of tamago nigiri seems simple. It is a rectangle of cooked egg placed over rice. But making tamago well requires precise control of heat, of seasoning, of the layering technique that builds the omelette in thin sheets, each one cooked and folded over the last, until a thick, springy rectangle has been built up. Some chefs add dashi, the Japanese broth of kombu seaweed and dried bonito, to their egg mixture. Others add nothing but sugar and salt. The result, when done well, is something that vibrates at the edge between savory and sweet, with a texture that is simultaneously firm and yielding. It is said in the sushi world that when evaluating the quality of a new sushi restaurant or chef, experienced eaters pay particular attention to two things: the rice and the tamago. The rice, because it is the foundation of everything, and any weakness there will undermine all that follows. The tamago, because it is a preparation that requires real skill and attention, and because it is easy to cut corners. A chef who takes the trouble to make tamago beautifully is a chef who cares about the whole experience. Now let us follow sushi as it begins to travel. Because beginning in the mid-20th century and accelerating dramatically in the 1970s and 1980s, sushi began its journey beyond Japan's borders and into the wider world. And what happened to sushi on that journey is one of the more fascinating stories in the history of food. The vehicle of sushi's global spread was in many ways the Japanese diaspora, Japanese emigrants to the United States, to Brazil, to Hawaii, to Canada, brought their food traditions with them, adapting them with the ingredients available in their new environments. The west coast of the United States, particularly Los Angeles, became an early center of Japanese cuisine in America, with sushi restaurants appearing as early as the 1950s, initially serving a predominantly Japanese-American clientele. For a long time, sushi remained unfamiliar and somewhat intimidating to most American diners. The idea of eating raw fish was a psychological barrier that was genuinely difficult for many people to cross. And so, creativity came to the rescue. In the late 1960s or early 1970s, accounts differ on the precise moment, a roll was invented in Los Angeles that would change the trajectory of sushi's global expansion forever. This is the California roll, and its origin story is itself a small piece of culinary history. One widely told account credits Ichiro Mashita, a chef at a restaurant in downtown Los Angeles, with the invention. The challenge was this: the traditional maki roll, sushi rice, and fillings wrapped in a sheet of nori seaweed, was itself unfamiliar to many American diners. The seaweed, in particular, presented a texture and flavor that some found challenging. And the fish inside, tuna or yellowtail often, was raw, which remained a concern. Mashita, or someone working in a similar spirit of pragmatic innovation at around the same time, made several changes. First, he replaced the tuna with crab meat, specifically imitation crab, a product made from processed white fish that was inexpensive, widely available, and already cooked. Second, he added avocado, which was abundantly available in California and provided a creamy richness that complemented the crab beautifully. Third, and perhaps most importantly, he turned the roll inside out, placing the rice on the outside of the nori, with the seaweed now hidden in the interior of the roll. This inside-out roll is called uramaki. With the nori tucked away on the inside, its texture and flavor were muted, and the outside of the roll was coated in sesame seeds, which gave it a familiar, nutty appeal. The California roll was a gateway. It allowed people who had never eaten sushi to take a first step, to experience the vinegared rice, the freshness, the combination of textures, without confronting the full foreignness of the original tradition. And once people had taken that step, many found themselves curious to go further, to try the real thing, to explore what else this cuisine had to offer. From Los Angeles, sushi spread across the United States with remarkable speed. The 1980s saw a boom in sushi restaurant openings across American cities. By the 1990s, sushi had become genuinely mainstream, no longer exotic, no longer an adventure, but a familiar, regular part of American food culture. It spread from the United States to Europe, to Australia, to South America, finding its way into supermarkets, airport restaurants, and the menus of hotels around the world. And as it spread, it changed. It was adapted to local tastes, local ingredients, local sensibilities. In Brazil, sushi rolls were made with tropical fruits. In Norway, salmon, which was not traditionally used in Japanese sushi, because Pacific salmon was not common in Japanese waters and was associated with parasites, became a celebrated topping after Norwegian salmon farmers, working with Japanese partners in the 1980s, successfully promoted Atlantic salmon as safe for raw consumption. Today, salmon nigiri is one of the most popular forms of sushi worldwide, beloved in Japan itself, despite being a relatively recent addition to the tradition. This is one of those facts that genuinely surprises many people. Salmon sushi, which feels like it must be one of the most ancient and essential forms of sushi, is in fact quite new. A product of a specific trade negotiation and a successful marketing campaign, not of centuries of tradition. The Japanese initially resisted it. The association between salmon and parasites was strong in the culinary culture. But eventually, the quality and safety of the Norwegian product won over consumers, and what was once foreign became familiar. Sushi today exists in a kind of layered reality. At one level, it is a global food that billions of people have tasted in some form. As a supermarket roll, as a piece from a conveyor-belt restaurant, as a casual lunch. At another level, it remains a deeply traditional craft, practiced by chefs who have devoted their lives to its mastery, who still go to the fish market before dawn, who still season their rice by feel and memory, who still believe that the most important qualities of a great piece of sushi cannot be taught quickly or reduced to a recipe. Both of these realities are true simultaneously, and there is no contradiction between them. The supermarket California roll and the 30-piece omakase at a Tokyo restaurant are both forms of sushi. They occupy different places in the spectrum of experience, but they are connected by a long and winding chain of history, adaptation, transmission, and change. Food, like all living things, transforms as it moves through time and across geography. The question is not whether it changes, but whether something essential survives the change. Let us return for a moment to Japan itself, because the story of sushi in Japan has continued to develop through the 20th and 21st centuries in its own ways, independent of what was happening abroad. Conveyor-belt sushi, kaiten-zushi, deserves a particular mention. It was invented in 1958 by a restaurateur named Yoshiaki Shiraishi, who opened the first kaiten-zushi restaurant in Osaka after reportedly being inspired by watching beer bottles moving along a conveyor belt in a brewery. His insight was simple and brilliant. If customers could choose from plates moving past them on a belt, the restaurant could serve many more people with fewer staff. Prices could be kept very low. Sushi could become truly democratic food, accessible to anyone at any budget. Kaiten-zushi became enormously popular. Today, there are thousands of these restaurants across Japan, and they have spread internationally as well. At the high end, some conveyor belt restaurants use sophisticated ordering technology, with plates delivered by small rail cars that travel directly from the kitchen to the customer's seat. At the low end, a meal of several plates can cost less than 500 yen, a few dollars. making it genuinely one of the most affordable eating experiences in Japan. This is a long way from the narezushi that was once given as tribute to the imperial court. Another fascinating chapter in modern Japanese sushi history is the rise and transformation of tuna as a prestige ingredient. For most of Japanese culinary history, the fattiest cuts of bluefin tuna, the otoro and chutoro, the deeply marbled belly sections, were actually not considered particularly desirable. Fat was not prized in the Japanese diet in the way it is in many Western traditions. Lean red tuna, akami, was the preferred and more expensive cut. The fatty belly sections were sometimes given away or used for cat food. It was only in the 20th century, as Western food preferences began to influence Japanese tastes, and as refrigeration made it possible to preserve the delicate fatty flesh reliably, that otoro came to be prized as the supreme luxury of the sushi counter. Today, a single piece of high-quality otoro at a top Tokyo sushi restaurant can cost more than a full meal elsewhere. It is one of the most expensive foods in the world, served in a bite that lasts perhaps 3 seconds and dissolves on the tongue like the richest, most oceanic butter you can imagine. The journey from cat food to the pinnacle of culinary luxury is a remarkable arc, and it happened within living memory. There is something about sushi that resists easy categorization. It is ancient and modern simultaneously. It is both peasant food and emperor's food. It is democratic and deeply elitist. It is Japanese to its core and also genuinely global, having been adapted and reimagined by cultures on every inhabited continent. It is simple: rice, fish, a touch of seasoning, and yet it contains multitudes. The philosopher of food might say that sushi endures because it speaks to something essential about the human relationship with time. In narezushi, time was the primary ingredient. Years of patient fermentation, transforming humble materials into something rare and valuable. In hayazushi, time was compressed, vinegar standing in for fermentation, producing a result in hours rather than years. In nigiri-zushi, time is compressed further still. A few seconds of practiced hand pressing producing something that has the quality of great effort, even though the motion is nearly instantaneous. And yet behind that instantaneous motion lies the years of training that made it possible. In this sense, every piece of sushi holds time. It contains the time of the apprentice learning to shape rice, the time of the fisherman setting out before dawn, the time of the seasons turning, the fish moving through the water, the rice growing in the paddies and ripening in the autumn sun, the time of the ancient fermenters who first placed fish and rice together in a clay pot and waited. All of that time is folded into the small, perfect thing placed before you on the polished wood of the counter. And perhaps that is why eating great sushi has the quality that it does, of stillness, of presence, of something being given and received that is more than nutrition. You are, in some sense, consuming time. A very long, very patient, very human kind of time. We have traveled a great distance tonight, from the riverbanks of ancient Southeast Asia to the bright lights of the Edo street stalls, from the dawn fish markets of Tokyo to the sushi restaurants of Los Angeles. We have met the patient fermenters, the quick-handed Edo-style chefs, the devoted itamae who gave their lives to learning. We have tasted, in imagination, the deep earthiness of aged narezushi, the clean brightness of a perfectly seasoned nigiri, the creamy surprise of a California roll encountered for the first time. Sushi carries all of these stories. It carries the whole long human endeavor to take what the earth and the sea provide and transform it through skill, through patience, through accumulated knowledge, into something beautiful. We have traveled a great distance tonight, from the riverbanks of ancient Southeast Asia to the bright lights of the Edo street stalls, from the dawn fish markets of Tokyo to the sushi restaurants of Los Angeles. We have met the patient fermenters, the quick-handed Edo stall chefs, the devoted itamae who gave their lives to learning. We have tasted in imagination the deep earthiness of aged narezushi, the clean brightness of a perfectly seasoned nigiri, the creamy surprise of a California roll encountered for the first time. Sushi carries all of these stories. It carries the whole long human endeavor to take what the earth and the sea provide and transform it through skill, through patience, through accumulated knowledge, into something beautiful. And perhaps the most remarkable thing about this transformation is how unassuming it remains at its heart. A pinch of rice, a slice of fish, a breath of vinegar, a touch of salt. When you strip sushi to its essential elements, it is almost nothing. And yet, in the hands of someone who has given their life to it, it becomes everything. This is not a paradox unique to sushi. It appears in every great craft tradition. The potter working with nothing but earth and water, the calligrapher with nothing but ink and paper, the musician with nothing but air and string. The simplicity of the materials is not a limitation. It is the point. When the materials are simple, there is nowhere to hide. The skill, or its absence, is entirely visible. There is a Japanese aesthetic concept closely related to this, wabi-sabi. It is a philosophy of beauty that finds value in the imperfect, the incomplete, and the transient. A wabi-sabi sensibility sees the beauty in a tea bowl that is slightly asymmetrical, in a garden that has moss growing over old stone, in the way a piece of fresh fish, sliced at this particular angle at this particular moment, is precisely what it needs to be right now and will never be quite this way again. Sushi, in its freshness and its precision and its total dependence on the quality of its moment, is a wabi-sabi food. You cannot eat the same piece of sushi twice. This is obvious in a literal sense. The piece you ate is gone, but it is true in a deeper sense too. The fish that the chef bought this morning was different from yesterday's fish. The rice, cooked this morning, has a particular temperature and texture that will change within the hour. The moment at which you put the piece of sushi in your mouth is a moment that will not come again. The great sushi chefs understand this, and it sharpens their attention. Each piece is made for now, not for yesterday, not for tomorrow, for now. This is, in a way, a teaching about presence, about the value of being exactly where you are, at exactly this moment, paying full attention to what is being offered. We spend so much of our lives caught between memory and anticipation, replaying what has happened, rehearsing what might happen, that the present moment often passes almost unnoticed. The experience of eating something made with complete attention, intended to be eaten with complete attention, can briefly interrupt that pattern, can bring us, for just a moment, into the full reality of now. The taste, the texture, the temperature, the fragrance, all of it arriving at once, demanding presence. Perhaps this is why so many people describe their first experience of genuinely great sushi as something close to an awakening. Not a grand or dramatic awakening, but a quiet one. A moment of sitting very still and tasting something with their whole attention, and feeling with surprise that this is what eating is supposed to feel like. That something has been recovered. Some basic animal-human quality of attention and pleasure. That the noise and speed of ordinary life had caused them to forget. The fish markets of Japan operate on a scale and at a pace that is hard to imagine if you have not witnessed it. The most famous is Toyosu Market in Tokyo, which in 2018 replaced the legendary Tsukiji market that had operated since 1935. Tsukiji was, for over 80 years, the largest wholesale fish market in the world, handling hundreds of tons of seafood every day. Its pre-dawn tuna auctions drawing visitors and professionals from around the globe. The atmosphere at Tsukiji on a busy morning was unlike anything else. The roar of the auction, the cold air, the enormous frozen tuna laid out in rows on the concrete floor, the rapid hand gestures of bidders signaling amounts in a code outsiders could not read, the immediate transformation of successful bids into movement and commerce as the purchased fish were carted off to be broken down and distributed. Toyosu, the replacement market, is larger and more modern, with temperature-controlled halls and more orderly logistics. The famous tuna auctions continue there, and they remain one of the great spectacles of Japanese food culture. At the first auction of the new year, held in January, traditionally the moment when the first high-quality bluefin tuna of the season is sold, prices reach extraordinary heights. These first-of-the-year auctions, called Hatsumaguro, have become something close to a national event, with the winning bids reported in the news. In recent years, the winning bids at these ceremonial auctions have reached tens of millions of yen for a single fish. In 2019, the sushi restaurant chain Onodera paid 333 million yen, over $3 million US, for a single 278-kilogram bluefin tuna. The price was partly ceremonial, partly a marketing statement, but it illustrated with perfect clarity the extraordinary value that Japanese culture places on the best fish at the best moment. Most sushi, of course, is not made from fish that cost $3 million. Most sushi is eaten at kaiten-sushi restaurants, or made at home, or picked up at a convenience store. And Japan's convenience stores, the legendary kombini, deserve a mention in any honest account of sushi's role in modern Japanese life. The sushi sold at 7-Eleven, or Lawson, or Family Mart in Japan is genuinely good by any reasonable standard. The rice is properly seasoned. The fish, while not the finest available, is fresh and clean. The presentation is neat. A bento of convenience store sushi is one of the small everyday pleasures of life in Japan, and millions of people eat it every week without any sense that they are compromising on quality. The democratization of sushi that began with the kaiten-sushi restaurants has extended all the way to the refrigerated cabinet by the register, and this is, on balance, a good thing. And yet, there remains something at the high end that cannot be captured by refrigerated cabinets or conveyor belts or any amount of clever industrialization. There remains the experience of sitting at a small counter in a restaurant that has been operating for 40 years, where the chef has been making sushi for 30 of those years, where everything is sourced this morning and prepared today, where you eat what you are given and trust entirely in the care of the person standing before you. This experience is rarer, more expensive, and in some ways more demanding. It asks something of the eater, as well as the chef. It asks attention, and it asks trust. But those who have experienced it understand why it continues to exist, alongside every more democratic form of the food. It's not snobbery that draws people to the high counter. It is something closer to reverence. The same quality of attention and care that draws people to a great concert, or to a work of art that stops them in a museum corridor, or to a paragraph in a book that makes them put the book down and sit for a moment in silence. There's a quality of human excellence, of a person operating at the furthest boundary of what they can do, with full attention and complete skill, that is moving to witness and moving to receive. The itamae standing behind the counter is not performing. They are working. But their work, done at that level, becomes something that feels like a performance of a different kind. A performance of devotion, of accumulated time, of the quiet insistence that things can be done right, that it is worth the effort, that the small and perfect thing matters. There is a Japanese expression that is sometimes applied to masterful craftsmanship. Shokunin no te, the hands of the artisan. It suggests that the hands of someone who has worked at a craft for long enough become instruments of a wisdom that lives in the body, not only in the mind. The sushi chef does not think about how to shape the rice. The hands know. They have always known, since that knowledge entered them through the accumulated repetition of thousands and thousands of repetitions over years. The hands remember everything. We could think about our own hands tonight as we lie here in the quiet. What do our hands know? What has been learned through them, carried in them, without our conscious awareness? There is wisdom in the body that the mind does not always have access to. There is knowledge that lives in repetition, in the long practice of small things done well, again and again, through seasons and years. Sushi teaches us, if we allow it to, that there is dignity in the small, in the precise, in the repeated, in the carefully made. A world that often prizes the large, the loud, and the novel can forget this lesson. But it is always available to us, in the quiet discipline of the artisan, in the patient transformation of simple things into something greater, in the long memory carried in a culture's food. Consider for a moment the wasabi served alongside sushi. Real wasabi, the genuine rhizome grated fresh at the moment of service, is almost vanishingly rare outside of Japan. And even within Japan, it is expensive and not always available. The plant is extraordinarily difficult to cultivate. It grows in the clean, cold, running water of mountain streams, and it requires very specific conditions of temperature and water quality and shade that are hard to replicate at scale. A proper wasabi plant takes 2 years to mature before the rhizome, the gnarled greenish root that is grated for use, is ready. During those 2 years it must be tended carefully, in running water, in appropriate shade, in the right mountain climate. The result, when it is grated fresh on a special sharkskin grater, called an oroshi, produces a paste that is fragrant, slightly sweet, and delivers its heat in a way that blooms briefly in the sinuses and then fades cleanly, without the lasting burn of chili. It is an extraordinary ingredient. And the vast majority of what is served as wasabi in sushi restaurants outside Japan, and indeed in many within Japan, is not wasabi at all, but a mixture of horseradish, mustard, and green food coloring. The flavor is sharper, less nuanced, and without the floral fragrance of the real thing. It does the job, but it is not the same. This is another of those small, surprising truths that the world of sushi contains. The food that billions of people eat around the world, that they believe they recognize completely, contains within it a layer of authenticity and refinement that most of them have never encountered, not as a criticism, only as an observation that there is always, in any tradition of genuine depth, more to discover. The more you learn about sushi, the more you realize how much remains to be learned. This is true of all great subjects. There is also the matter of gari, the thin-sliced pickled ginger served alongside sushi. Its role is often misunderstood. In popular restaurant culture, gari is frequently eaten with each piece of sushi placed on top of or alongside the fish. But in the traditional sushi world, gari serves a specific function. It is a palate cleanser, meant to be eaten between different types of sushi so that the flavors of one do not bleed into the flavors of the next. When moving from a rich, fatty tuna to a delicate white fish, the gari resets the mouth, clearing away the previous impression and preparing you for the next. Eaten at this pace, with this intention, gari is not an accompaniment, but a kind of punctuation. The pause between sentences, the breath before the next note. In the same way, the small cup of tea that sometimes accompanies sushi serves to warm the palate and refresh the senses, maintaining receptiveness through a long succession of flavors. The soy sauce, too, has its protocols in traditional sushi eating. The correct approach for nigiri in the classic tradition is to pick up the piece of sushi, turn it upside down, and dip only the fish lightly into the soy sauce, not the rice. The rice, which has been carefully seasoned with vinegar and salt by the chef, should not absorb additional sodium. The fish, which may have less inherent saltiness, benefits from a light touch of soy. Furthermore, the piece is intended to be eaten in a single bite, fish side down, so that the seasoned fish meets the tongue first, directly. These are not arbitrary conventions. Each one has a reason rooted in flavor and texture, in the optimization of the eating experience as it has been understood and refined over generations. There is something simultaneously amusing and moving about the depth of thought that has gone into the correct way to eat a small piece of rice and fish. One could reasonably ask whether any of this matters. Whether the person eating sushi with a fork, dunking the rice heavily in soy sauce, and eating 2 bites at a time is really missing something fundamental. And the honest answer is, probably not, in any profound sense. The fish is still delicious. The meal is still enjoyable. The experience is still real and valid. But there is also something in the full attention, in learning the right way, in understanding the reasons, in allowing the intention of the craft to reach you intact, that adds a dimension to the experience. It is like hearing a piece of music performed by a master musician versus hearing it played on a small speaker in a cafe. The notes are the same, the music is recognizable, but one version carries something the other does not. A fullness, a presence, a sense of the full intention behind the work being transmitted without loss. Whether you eat your sushi with chopsticks or fingers, whether you dip fish or rice, whether you use real wasabi or the substitute, none of this changes the fundamental gift that sushi offers, which is in the end this: that someone cared, that someone got up before dawn and went to the market and chose carefully, that someone tasted the rice and adjusted the seasoning until it was right, that someone shaped a small handful of the most ordinary substance in the world, cooked rice, with hands that remembered 10,000 previous attempts, and placed it before you with a piece of the sea. That care is available in the most humble bowl of convenience store sushi, and in the most exalted omakase counter. The scale is different. The intensity is different, but the origin is the same. The human desire to take simple materials and, through skill and attention, transform them into something worth sharing. Somewhere in Japan right now, a chef is arriving at a fish market before the city has woken up. The stalls are lit with bright lights against the pre-dawn dark. The air is cold and smells of the sea. The chef moves slowly through the rows of fish laid out on ice, touching, looking, evaluating. No hurry, only attention. Only the accumulated knowledge of years directing the eyes and the hands toward what is best, what is at its peak, what the morning has offered that is worth bringing back to the restaurant for the people who will sit at the counter later today. In a few hours, those people will sit down. They will not know the name of the market where the fish was chosen. They will not know how long the chef has been awake, or how many miles the tuna traveled from the sea. They will sit, and pieces of sushi will be placed before them, one by one, and they will taste. And if the chef's attention and skill have worked as they were meant to, the people sitting at that counter will feel something that is difficult to name. A kind of rightness, a quiet pleasure, a momentary sense that the world has been ordered in a way that is good. That feeling is the destination of all this long history. The fermenters and the fishermen and the apprentices and the travelers and the innovators, all of it was moving, slowly, toward that moment of sitting down, of receiving, of tasting, and of feeling, for just a moment, that something was right. Let that thought settle around you now. The long history of something simple, something patient, something made with care. The countless hands that carried a tradition forward through centuries of change. The morning fish market, lit against the dark. The sound of knife on cutting board. The small, perfect thing placed before you. Let all of that quieten now. Let it become background. Let your breath slow and deepen. There's nothing left to think about tonight. The story has been told. The meal has been served. The night has settled completely around you, soft and still. Now please sit back and enjoy the gentle sounds of nature.